I'm very glad to say we have Lowkey in the house. Lowkey is going to speak, hopefully, for sort of 40 minutes or 30 minutes, and then there'll be very much time for Q&A, and that's your bit. So, without much more further ado, let's have a huge bloody gut cheer for Lowkey! Who will also be performing at 9:30 on the Soundscape stage.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so sorry to have been so late and to have kept you all waiting. What a wonderful audience we have here today. So many lovely faces. My understanding is that it was hoped that I would talk about the situation in Gaza. I visited Gaza in 2009, the year of Operation Cast Lead, in which Israel killed 1,400 Palestinians. And in the direct aftermath, I was also involved in a project to raise funds to rebuild Gaza. We were able to get into the Strip after being detained for 5 days by the Egyptian government. And at that time, I remember when we entered Gaza, feeling that what I was seeing was apocalyptic. Looking around, seeing buildings destroyed, seeing people very, very clearly making every effort to try and have a normal life in what were really extraordinary conditions. And one of the things that has really repeatedly circled in my head during this time is a lot of that place and a lot of the people that I knew at the time are very, very likely to not still be alive, but also the places are also likely to not still be present. The level of destruction that has been visited on Gaza is really absolutely out of this world. We are talking about a level of technological advancement in the means of killing human beings which have gone far beyond expectations and are now being used on a civilian population in what are really sadistic ways. You are seeing people queuing for aid on a daily basis, being shot down in those queues. You are seeing people being deprived of their basic necessities for months and months on end. And ultimately, in Gaza, what you see is a microcosm of what now can happen to other populations around the world, because it has been demonstrated that the rest of humanity will largely stand by and allow it to happen. What people have seen in Hollywood films about the Hunger Games, you've seen times a million in Gaza today. I was fortunate enough to live in Palestine at one point for up to a year. I was training young children in one of the camps in boxing, playing football with them regularly, teaching English as well. And I have to say that as an experience, I really learnt far more about humanity and about being human from these beautiful people than they would ever have learnt from me in any of the classes that I was given. And I feel truly, truly privileged to have been able to spend that time in both Palestine, the West Bank, and Gaza. And I think ultimately for us here in this society, in a society that we have to remember, Britain, it didn't have an empire. Britain was an empire, meaning Britain occupied 14 million square miles of the planet. There's only 22 countries in the world that Britain did not occupy. In fact, a large proportion of humanity owe their Independence Day to Britain leaving their country. They are former British colonies. That's the reason for English today being the lingua franca in so many aspects of human function. And particularly when it comes to the Palestinian issue, you have to look at the way in which, according to British imperialism at the time, having a corridor through which to reach the east and through which the capturing of resources could travel back through, establishing what they referred to as a little Ulster in Palestine. So after developing the methods of repression in the north of Ireland for hundreds of years, the idea was to export them to Palestine and actually set up, off the back of the Balfour Declaration, you had the setting up during the British Mandate of separate institutions according to religious identity. And that was installed by the British, by Herbert Samuel, the first British High Commissioner in Palestine following the establishment of the British Mandate. That means separate health institutions, separate educational institutions. One of the only sections of the Palestinian daily life that did not have that separation was the railways, actually, at that time during the British Mandate. And then on top of that, Britain worked on building up what were at that time Zionist gangs who had the intention to engineer the demographic of the demographic balance in a particular way in order to allow for an entity to be formed which privileged one particular religious identity over the people that had lived in that place for thousands and thousands of years, and ultimately worked to attritionally displace that population. And that's prior to 1948. And then, of course, in the Nakba of 1948, you had almost 1 million Palestinians displaced at that time by these Zionist groups that were backed by the British in several different ways. And now we're in a situation where the vast majority of Palestinians in the world exist outside of Palestine. And what is happening in Gaza today is worse than the Nakba by many, 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 many times. And so ultimately, we are stuck in this sort of spectatorship of human suffering, watching the suffering, feeling helpless to stop it, but feeling a natural aversion to what is taking place in front of our eyes, and restricted by our own political systems, restricted deeply in ways that in options we have. What options do we have through our existing political system to change that arrangement? Britain could sanction Israel in a serious way. Britain could cut off its arms sales to Israel tomorrow. Britain could stop sending its components for the F-35 fighter jets that Israel is using. You have to remember, 15% of the F-35 which Israel is using in Gaza is produced in this country. At any point, the British government could stop that. According to the Arms Trade Treaty, which Britain is a signator of, it must not make arms sales and sign off on exports. The business secretary must not stamp exports to leave this country if they may be used for violations of international humanitarian law. Now, that is exactly what those arms exports are being used to do in Gaza and in Palestine. You have the evidence directly in front of you. According to the Genocide Convention, anyone that is party to it must take steps to prevent the commission of genocide and punish those responsible for it. Now, Britain is not taking those steps. Within our existing political system, what methods do we have to stop that? How can we stop that? When have we ever had it reflected within our political system, somebody calling for that with any form of power? So we ourselves, it has been revealed that our own society is deeply limited. Our own political system is deeply limited. How can we forget that it took 300 years for the Chartists, people who were not landed gentry, who did not own property, to vote for any form of parliamentary representation? 300 years of agitation. It took a massacre at Peterloo. It took the leader of the Chartist movement, William Cuffy, who was a black man, imprisoned and sent to a penal colony in next to Australia, in Tasmania. And remember, he may well have been one of the last black people in Tasmania, because they were largely genocided. They still exist, but in very small number. What about the Tolpuddle Martyrs? This was the first union grouping in this country that tried to establish collective bargaining. What happened to them? Well, they were sent to a penal colony in Australia. What about the suffragettes? What means did they resort to in order to get that very, very basic right, which today we consider to speak volumes about our society? We behave as if this is somehow a mark of superiority over other societies, that people can vote for parliamentary representation who don't own property and who are women. Yet, in order to win that right, which, as we've already detailed, is extremely limited in its scope of what it can achieve. You look at the ownership of land in this country. 1% of the population own 50% of the land. There is more land in the country used for the building of golf courses than for homes. Golf courses, there's more land used for golf courses than for homes in this country. Something like 1 in 65 people in London, the capital city, is officially homeless. What type of arrangement do we have here which we are leading ourselves to believe should be exported to other places in the world and is somehow superior to other forms of society that exist? And on the topic of Palestine here, what you also have is ways in which the British government could very easily take steps to stop organizations involved in the building of what the British government says are illegal settlements in Palestine. It could take steps to stop those, which in some cases, those are registered charities here. They could very easily be stopped or at least impeded from doing what they are doing. You have registered charities in this country directly funneling funds into the Israeli military. There is every reason to believe that those funds are being used for violations of international humanitarian law. It's not even a radical argument to say that that should not happen and that can be stopped. So here we are in this situation today, trying to work out a way to be effective in this society. There was a time when you had 10 factories for Israel's largest arms company in this country, and you don't anymore. And there are limitations on what we can say about how and why you don't have 10 anymore. But the truth is that in the history of the movement to support Palestine in this country, one of the only ways that people have been able to achieve material change has been through direct action and shutting down factories. Now, when the vast majority of humanity looks at a picture like this, they do not view it as controversial for weapons not to be produced in this country that are aiding genocide. For instance, even within the factories where some of these people worked, remember the Lucas Plan. This was a fascinating initiative which never came to fruition. In the 70s, Tony Benn went to the Lucas Aerospace, which was due to be cut heavily, and many people were due to lose their jobs. Tony Benn went to them and he said to the workers, what can we do to help avoid this? And the workers said, well, actually, we've got the knowledge and know-how that could very easily be converted into working in other forms of contraption rather than killing machines. Why don't we make this particular dialysis machine that we have the know-how how to make help us become more versatile in that way. And this was the Lucas plan, and it never came to fruition. So the will exists within humanity. In fact, a study was carried out that found that for every billion that is spent on the arms trade creates, if I remember correctly, around 15,000 jobs. But you could very easily put that same money into healthcare and create more jobs, close to 20,000. You could put the same money into green energy and create more jobs, over 20,000. And so here we are in a situation where this particular industry, which feeds off the destruction of human life and is built to kill, is actually also a haven for the majority of corruption in financial transactions around the world. The arms trade accounts as a single industry for 40% of all corruption. It's a perfect way for people to hide bribes, and you've seen it repeated again and again and again. And it's documented masterfully in the book Shadow World by Andrew Feinstein, an expert on the arms trade. And so we have to bring new ways of thinking about our place in the world, how it is we can play a positive role with others, how we can build a new society which does not look at the killing of people on an industrial scale as simply the status quo, as simply the mood music of our time, rather than us turning on the news and hearing of these horrific calamities taking place and just turning away and going about our days as normal. How can we build something which actually acts directly on that and changes the world for the better? I guess that is the question, and I look forward to hearing from some of you and working on ways that we can do that. Thank you for having me today at Green Gathering.
So we have a couple of roving mics going round. If we could start off with a lady, please, hands up. Lady down here in front of right. Yes, do feel free to introduce yourself, and if you're involved with a particular organisation or campaign, we'd like to know.
Hey, Gabby, not involved, but wanting to be more. I think part of the problem is that the way that the political parties work is through funding, and what we've seen time after time is the amount of money that's being donated to the Labour Party and how quickly politicians can flop from being suddenly all these ethical people to making really terrible decisions because they're being funded by Israeli lobby groups or various parties and groups that represent the, essentially the Israeli government. And what I worry about is so much money is then also being donated to groups like Reform. Not everyone's got money to donate to political campaigns, but unless we, limit the amount of money that's being donated to them, then we're going to constantly have problems in which we've got politicians being bought by these lobby groups. And at the same time, you've got the Green Party who are self-funding, my sister ran for MP and she literally had to buy her own leaflets. So unless we get behind these groups in different ways, unless we go around flyering, door knocking, and unless we've got, a cap on what political parties can accept in terms of donations, we're going to end up in the same way as America.
Hi, okay. Yeah, I've got a question. It's going to take me a minute to get there. My name's Leonie. I have been involved in setting up a farm-to-farm twinning project with farms in Palestine and farms in the UK that are members of the Land Workers Alliance. There's also a twin that's happened between a seed bank in Palestine and a seed bank in the UK. Yesterday, just before I left, I got the news that the Palestinian seed bank has been destroyed. And it was, in a way, not a surprise because they do this really amazing thing, like they multiply seeds and send them out to Palestinian farmers. They're unique in the West Bank. And my question is, how can I get the word out about this particular genocidal act? And will you help me?
Yeah, of course, absolutely. Absolutely, for sure. Feel free to contact me about it, and I'm happy to help push it out in any way. It's interesting the way that Zionism approached the question of agriculture. So there were 3 what they call aliyahs. So this was the immigration of Zionist communities into Palestine from the late 1800s. And the first one is largely considered a failure. And the reason it's considered a failure among the Zionists was because they employed Palestinians to till the soil, because at that time you had people coming from Eastern Europe that did not have a familiarity with the land and were not able to till the soil successfully on the colonies that they existed on. But then what you also have is, if you look at the way Israel as an entity has been built up, it survives on 60,000 Palestinian builders every day. So you have the building of the buildings within Israel, largely built by Palestinians, Palestinian labor. But also, there was a committed policy to move Palestinian workers away from the agricultural sector from the 80s, because the understanding was this is so important to the ability for Israel to reproduce itself on a daily basis. You can't have untrustworthy Palestinians working in and around it, because of how important this aspect of daily life is. So it's fascinating, and I'm very sad to hear what you said, and absolutely any way that I can help with that, for sure.
Thank you. And over here, who are you, please?
My name's Andy. Sorry, yeah. The question I've got is, you said about how it was the empire that wanted to make this little Ulster in what was Palestine. How do you see that empire now functioning? And, if we're really wanting to strike back at the empire and really wanting to get back at the empire that's kind of hidden itself behind all these corporate actors, what do you think is the best way to do that?
I mean, it is difficult. What does it look like today? So it looks like today 1 in 10 people in the British Army are in fact foreign nationals, largely from former British colonies. 37% of all tax losses that governments face around the world come from companies based in British tax havens. What else does the empire look like? It looks like hundreds of military bases across the world, really leaving a footprint that the US empire fills in, militarily speaking. I mean, that's a massive question, what you're asking. I think in the sort of most immediate and direct way is looking at the ways in which there is a large groundswell on particular issues, particularly like the Palestinian issue, and finding a way that you can contradict the policy that Britain is looking to assert there. The problem is that the elite here have had hundreds and hundreds of years of developing very careful PR and very careful psychological warfare and manipulation of populations, because they've had, of course, Ireland was the laboratory for it, and it was exported in so many other places. I think even just unpicking that aspect of what's happening. So, for instance, Keir Starmer coming out and talking about the recognition of a Palestinian state, the way I personally perceive it is this is about buying time for Israel to really... And so much of... The key thing to look at is infrastructure, rather than the political pronouncements, because often the political pronouncements are for perception management rather than for actual material reality. And so, have the spy flights stopped? It seems they may have. They may have stopped, which is also, of course, a good sign. But had Matt Kennard, for instance, not exposed the spy flights, it probably would have never come out. The British government would have never admitted to it. They have a secret military agreement with Israel signed in 2020. We don't know what that stipulates. We don't know what that means. They have a British spy team in Israel that went since the beginning of the genocide. What you also have is a D-notice. So D-notice is when the government writes to journalists and said, we would prefer you don't write about this because it would be damaging for national security. And so early on, The Sun wrote about British special forces having a role with what was happening in Gaza. but being sent to Cyprus, ready to be involved. Immediately, the government wrote to all journalists and said, this is a D notice on the issue of SAS activity in Gaza. Do not write about it because it's damaging to national security. And they all have been obedient to it, with an exception of very few independent media platforms. And so even just revealing what Britain has been doing during this time is hard enough and important enough, I reckon, in my estimation.
Thank you. Yes.
Hi. Oh, it's loud. I live a lot of the year in Greece. I've met a lot of Palestinian people and specifically people from Gaza. I just want to say and then ask a question that if people manage to get out of Gaza, which is a very dangerous and costly thing to do, that they then face violence at Europe's borders. Not only this, IAI, the Israeli aerospace, it's the same company. So the drones that follow people in Gaza are the drones that follow them in the Mediterranean. They get put in a camp funded by the EU, and it's the same tech that will watch them to see if they gather to organize within that space when they're supposed to be safe. Obviously, we're all trying to work out what to do about this, but I wonder how to combat the military-industrial complex, given where we are right now in this country and given where we are in Europe. One thing in Greece that we have tried is to prevent boat docking, both things that are going towards Israel that could be used in this process, and also large tourist ships, as you might have seen on Syros recently. How do we continue this and make it more collaborative, and given the restrictions, how can we all work together and do something?
I mean, thank you so much. Well, I would say I would definitely take the lead from, the Greek dock workers and others that have been able to do what they have. It's been massively inspiring to people around the world to see these actions take place, and we need that reproduced everywhere. I would say here what we need is we've got some of the biggest trade unions that have had votes in 2010, that their membership voted unanimously for BDS, boycott, divestment and sanction. Why is it that you still have the TUC, for example, having a huge amount of shares in BAE Systems, which is the largest arms company in this country, which has benefited massively from the war in Gaza, for example? But more than that, why are members of Unite, for example, still working in arms factories? Why, GMB is a different story. GMB supports the arms trade. A union like Unite has a very clear BDS consensus. GMB does. Why are they not implementing this? They should have implemented this years ago. They should have implemented this when it was voted for, literally 15 years ago. How is it possible that their membership can be so inconsequential on this issue? And what is at work here? So I would say that working on those particular issues here would probably be the best thing we can do, and the closest we can get to the type of actions you've seen taken in Greece and other European countries.
Yes, gentleman in the red T-shirt, do introduce yourself.
Hello, everybody. I'm Paul. I'm from Just Stop Oil, and I participated in one of the M25 actions, which resulted in a bit of prison time for me, but that's irrelevant. This is probably the largest gathering in this tent so far. And what intrigues me is, why is it that we all care about a situation like this more than we care about climate change? If Roger Hallam was here, he would say this is just another little fuck up in the Middle East, and just like he said about the pogroms, Jewish pogroms, and the death in Russia, 30 million deaths there, and so on. having what is the psychology in our mind which determines that climate change, which is a danger, and okay, exactly. We have to give shit about people, which means actually. Can I just finish my question, please? You can answer later on, okay?
Let him finish, please.
Shh. Thank you. I'm losing the thread of my question now. What I wanted to point out is that climate change threatens and is going to destroy not just them, but also us. Third world, second world, first world, us in this tent and everybody else. We are very difficult situation in Palestine, which are absolutely sympathize with Palestinians, of course. It's absolutely terrible what's happening there. But it's a minor issue in comparison to climate change. And I think what we need to do is to create this type of agreement, this type of support for climate change, which will then rescue all of us, including the Palestinians. Thank you.
Thank you.
I mean, in my personal opinion, I think to make the point that you're trying to make, I think you can't put these things as diametrically opposed to each other. Because, you know, literally you look at the carbon footprint of what Israel's doing in Gaza to those people, and you also look at militarism as part of the same thing. What I think also needs to be thought about more critically is actually the way that... so I lived next door to Grenfell Tower for many, many years. I lost a friend of mine in the fire, was there on the night. Now, off the back of the Kyoto agreements, the British government saw fit to insulate buildings across the country. Now, that is proven to lower carbon emissions from those buildings. In the process of doing that, the insulation companies, which had an absolute bonanza off it, are in many cases, and I'll get to the specifics of Grenfell, owned by BlackRock, or the top shareholder in them is BlackRock, which is also the top shareholder in Shell. So in the case of Grenfell, we had a situation where the insulation and the cladding on the building led to 72 people dying. It caused the fire to go up, to go around, and go down. Now, the company, Arconic, which was responsible for the cladding, its top shareholder is BlackRock, the same top shareholder in Shell. So there are ways in which the very same forces which have caused the climate apocalypse, which we're living through an attritional example of, are benefiting from the other side of this also. And I think there needs to be critical thinking about all of that. But I think in order to, to make that point that you're trying to make, is I don't think it's necessary to sort of put what's happening in Gaza as sort of paling in comparison to it or being somehow against it. It's not against it, you know. It's not against it.
Thank you. We've got time for a few more questions, so thank you for keeping it snappy. So we're over here, and then gentleman over there, and then... Yes, go ahead. Go ahead, mate.
Hello. Thanks, Lowkey. Just thinking of the heroic Francesca Albanese, her words, is there any way people can think of pressurising, just keeping up the pressure on the idea of the UN coming in on the 25-mile long beach in Gaza and bringing in all the aid necessary really, really easily through the blockade? Is there any way of pressurising so that we can see a breakage of that blockade?
Well, I mean, yeah, what Francesca said, which I found interesting, was the idea of, 1,000 ships from around the world sailing to Gaza. I think it would definitely be very difficult for the Israeli Navy to deal with and the Israeli military to deal with. It would take great bravery. It would take a willingness to be detained by the Israelis, at least, and possibly be killed. But I do think we are reaching the stage where, if that could be organized, I think there would be many, many people, thousands of people, that would take such a risk to try and stop what's happening in Gaza. So I think the UN is too restricted personally, but she'd probably be far better placed to sort of answer that with a real perspective.
Thank you. Yeah, chap at the back there.
Hi there. Yeah, I'm Fraser. I'm founder of the Eco-Social Assembly, and we've got an idea as a proposal of a solution, not necessarily a quick fix, but a solution to bridge a gap towards the future. And what this man said and how Lowkey answered is very, very true. Everything is very connected, and at the moment we've got like a lot of left thinking, oh, this is the most important, or this is the most important. We've got this situation where these big sort of companies are controlling everything and sort of destroying the law and killing a lot of people. What we propose, we've got a decision and governance model that we promote that puts every decision through 3 questions. The questions are, is it best for society? Is it best for the environment? And does it follow an ethical framework? And using these questions as campaign groups or pushing towards political parties to be using these frameworks, we can start sharing a common language between campaign groups. How can we all work together? How can we stop from fracturing ourselves? With these questions as our basis of decision making and pushing that forward into governance, these things can start looking at court. I mean, for example, the court decision that we're allowed to carry on, with your F-35 bombing and stuff like that, is quite obviously this is not good for the environment, this is not best for society, and it's not ethical. By putting these things to our government, it's not a quick fix, but it's a slow push and movement. Then we can start taking these things to court and making our voice as a people heard, because the people don't want this shit. I've got some brochures if anyone wants. I'd like to pass one forward to Lowkey for now, but anyone else that wants one can come and see us. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you. Yes, quick question in the back here, and then over to this lady here, and then over to this gentleman here.
Hello, I'm Mary Ellen. I'm part of DPAC. I'm part of the Climate Emergency Centres, and I'm very, very concerned about how the Palestine genocide is also a disability crisis, a disability emergency. We're seeing children and people starving to death. We're seeing people being bombed. We're seeing the largest cohort of amputees in the world. And the issue of disability, the number of children and people that are being left maimed, starved, and physically and emotionally and psychologically disabled, the trauma of the entire population of Palestine, whether they're in Palestine or have been pushed out into somewhere else in the world, the collective trauma. I'm very concerned about that, and I hope that the gentleman there who was saying about the climate emergency, I made this for COP26 to show that the climate justice issue is a social justice issue, and we cannot ever solve the climate justice issue if we do not look at the roots of the climate justice issue, of the racism, the colonialism, the banks, the money, the arms industry that have created that and are continuing to create that. And if we don't deal with the social justice issue and the people, then we will never solve this. So let's look at how the disability issue is also dealt with, because it is something that we're not talking enough about. Thank you.
Lady here, gentleman here.
I'd love to ask this. It's a big subject. I'll keep it small. Is this working?
Aye.
Yeah, thank you. The two-state solution. I was in Palestine a few months. I can't see any hope for it. There's settlements everywhere. They've got 2 layers of roads to drive on, depending which number plate you've got. Paid for by America, of course. I've got Palestinian and Israeli friends who are working on a one-state solution. But every time I hear it spoken about in the media by good people who maybe haven't been there, or they're all talking about this two-state solution. Can anyone give me any hope for it? Because I can't see any, I'm sorry. But I have got friends who've drawn up a lot of stuff for the one state, if you're interested in copies, in Jerusalem.
Okay.
Thank you.
So, look at it this way. You now have the vast majority of Palestinians, close to 12 million, well, over 12 million, sorry, living outside of Palestine. Now, the right of return is enshrined in international law for those driven from their homes by not only the Nakba of 1948, but also the Naksa of 1967. Now, that's supposed to be part of the final status agreement, which Israel and the Palestinians would supposedly negotiate on. But the reality is this, that since Oslo, you have had the build-up of a comprador regime in Ramallah, which works on silencing and neutralizing all Palestinian resistance to Israel. UN resolution several UN resolutions, in fact, stipulate clearly that the Palestinians have the right to armed resistance as an occupied group of people. But the Oslo Accords and this idea of a two-state solution is about the entire demilitarization of the Palestinians and the rendering of them completely neutralized in terms of defending themselves against Israel. And so this two-state solution, so much has been built up and put into it by the European Union, by the Western states, and by the Gulf too. They've really foot the bill for having a collaborator regime in Ramallah, which actually arrests and even tortures and kills Palestinians for the Israelis. Now, also think about how Palestine has been used as a guinea pig to empower the Israeli economy during this time. So, for instance, the vast majority of the Palestinian population pre-Oslo were not connected to telephone lines. You literally had about 4% of the Palestinian population up until the 90s actually connected to mainline phones. What then happens is you have the establishment of a telecommunications industry which exists under the auspices of the Israeli Ministry of Communication, the founding of Palestinian telephone companies. But all of that creates a massive amount of data for Unit 8200 in Israel's military, which surveils the communications of Palestinians, has been found by whistleblowers within the unit to use that information to blackmail Palestinians also. And then what happens? In the neoliberal era, which sees the hollowing out of states around the world and private companies taking over the key functions of the state, private companies coming out of Unit 8200, founded by former Unit 8200 individuals that now hack phones, for example, for the Metropolitan Police. So when the British police want to hack phones of someone in this country, they use an Israeli company called Celebrite. That is completely alumni of Unit 8200. And Celebrite is in Australia, it's in several different countries around the world. And so in that way, the Palestinians and Oslo particularly, and the idea, the oasis of the two-state solution, the mirage actually more than an oasis, has been used to empower Israeli economy and then export it around the world and insinuate itself into the functions of other states, which is really, really quite crazy. So what I would say is that this idea of a two-state solution would be a Palestinian state which is demilitarized, has no ways of defending itself against Israel, has no form of sovereignty that can prevent Zionist colonies being planted on it, which have arms from the Israeli government. I mean, it supposedly would contain now over 500,000 Israeli settlers somehow. This would be a Palestinian state which contains over 500,000 Israeli settlers, which is completely demilitarized, which completely sells the right of return, which is the core of the Palestinian issue, which has nothing to do with Jerusalem, which again is the core of the Palestinian issue. So this idea of a two-state solution is just a PR tool that the British government and the rest of them are using. It's even in the form that we're talking about, it will not come to fruition. It was about prolonging the Zionist project rather than impeding the march of Zionism. The objective of Zionism is demographic engineering. It is reducing the amount of Palestinians in Palestine in order to establish a supremacist regime over their lives. It is about driving the Palestinians out of Palestine to all corners of the world. That's the march of Zionism, and that's what's happening.
Can't hear you.
Little bit frightened that when they finished in the IDF, they're going to come and live next door to me, but that's another story.
I mean, a two-state solution does seem difficult when you think that Israel's now taken over 78% of Palestinian lands, and I've heard it argued quite well for a one-state solution, rather like the route of South Africa, starting with boycott, disinvestment, sanctions, and then obviously Umkhonto Weziwezi took on to unaccountable sabotage on infrastructure, not on people. So we've got two very quick questions, and I'm going to take them together and give Lowkey a chance to answer them together, because we've got Dr. Chris Smyge just waiting to come in. Go ahead.
Yeah, hi, Lowkey. I'm Andrew. I just want to comment on climate and also international law, and to say that what's happening in Gaza, people have said it's the conscience of humanity. And if we don't address this with everything we've got, then everything else is lost. And in terms of climate, this morning I was and Paul was too, in a thing on climate adaptation, and frankly things will just totally unwind. I mean, we see genocide happening where there's breakdown at the moment, where social breakdown over 80 years longer has created the situation in Gaza. With climate breakdown, we will see the same things happening if we do not wake up and address this. And my question to Lowkey is, what can we do in international law in terms of the crimes against humanity, genocide? Those were brought in 1945 after the Second World War. We're seeing a breakdown of that rules-based order. How can we get back to that and actually, bring Netanyahu and the whole bang lot who are in this to the International Criminal Court? That's what's really needed, and that's what's going to protect us ultimately against the worst of climate breakdown too.
Thank you, and we'll take a question from Tracy here, and then give Lowkey.
Hi, Lowkey. Tracy, just one really, really basic question. If you are extremely worried about the march of Zionism and the genocide that is happening in Gaza, what one action could people in this field today go home and action on? What, in your opinion, what is the most effective action that we can all do as a community sat in this field? Please, Lowkey, if you don't mind, mate. Thank you for coming.
That's okay. I would say it's been proven by the last 5 years that the only thing which leads to material successes in this country is direct action.
Yes.
Now, direct action ended with the permanent shutting down of 2 Israeli arms company sites in this country. One of them, the subsidiary, was sold at a loss. The other one was making cooling units for the Merkava tanks, which you may sometimes see looking worse for wear in videos online. Now, the same site makes cooling units for buses in this country. What you also saw was the shutting down permanently of the main offices of Israel's largest arms company in London. Direct action in this case, especially when you're dealing with companies which are breaking international law, which is the consensus of everyone in the world. No one thinks that Israel's largest arms company is not involved in violations of humanitarian law. Even those who say what's happening in Gaza is not a genocide, they wouldn't say that Israel's largest arms company is not involved in breaking international law. And so therefore, shutting down those companies, I would say, is an act that not only you will be proud of in years to come, but at least the next 4 to 5 generations of your family will be proud of when they look back on it.
You know, a lot of the reason that all of us are here is the absolute moral outrage that what is going on before our eyes. It's the Warsaw Ghetto revisited, and it reminds me of one of the phrases of the great Peter Ustinov. You know, he said that the Jews were the first victims of the Nazis, and the Palestinians are the second victims of the Nazis, because that othering has simply transferred down the generation. And the Romany is under disdain. Yeah, of course. But, you know, what has been happening recently, some people have been stepping above the parapet, you know, Palestine Action, Lowkey, Kneecap, and they have suddenly become a conduit for this fucking moral outrage that I think we all fear. So I just want to, you know, I want you to give a bloody good cheer for people, A, who are prepared to step above the parapet, and B, let's just big them up even more. You know, there are court cases coming up. There are many court cases coming up, Kneecap, Pal Action. The very least we can do is be there and support. The very least the Green Gathering can do, you know, as a very small token of respect for people who have come out of prison after peaceful protests from Palestine Action and Just Stop Oil. We've been, you know, very happy to give all those released prisoners a ticket to the Green Gathering, because remember, this is one of the main networking points for social justice and environmental activists throughout the year. Just to finish again, please, a huge, huge hand for Lowkey. Yeah, go on, that was it, yes. Go on, yes.